Good evening and welcome to Reclaim Your Wellness. I'm your host for the evening, Leslie Foster, and I'm really delighted to lead another thought-provoking conversation in this successful campaign developed by the Black Women's Health Imperative and Healthy Women with the support of Novo Nordisk to make obesity a healthcare priority while improving the lives of people living with obesity. So in addition to ensuring that people living with obesity have access to science-based and comprehensive care, the campaign's mission is really to change the way the world sees, prevents, and treats obesity as a disease, a chronic disease, without shame or stigma. Now, when we say obesity is a chronic disease, we often get pushback, quite a lot of it. We've read it. And I think that has a lot to do with the stigma that surrounds obesity. But we deal in facts here. So the fact is that 94 million Americans of all ethnicities and ages have obesity in the United States. And Black people, particularly Black women, are disproportionately impacted. And it really wasn't until 2013 that the American Medical Association started to recognize obesity as this complex chronic disease, even though the National Institutes of Health had begun that process in 1998. And so we know that obesity is responsible for a growing prevalence of chronic diseases that touch the whole ecosystem. Obesity impacts every system of the body. We're talking about cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancers and liver disease and psychological depression and many other illnesses, diseases, and disorders. And that is why it is so important to recognize obesity for what it is, which is a chronic disease. And that is also why the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, also known as TROA, has been introduced to Congress. It's really to address some of these long-held disparities that have resulted by this lack of recognition for so long. So tonight we're going to talk candidly about obesity, about the devastating effect it has on the body and the health of us overall. And then we're going to talk about what the faith community is doing to help fill in the gap. We'll talk about what's being done medically, what's being done legislatively. But what's different about this conversation tonight is really about how churches and spiritual institutions are uplifting those in the community who are living with obesity. So what's the connection? Well, we have just the panel to answer the question. But first, we're going to have a few remarks from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who represents the 18th District of Texas, which is pretty much known as Houston. She is a very busy woman working on behalf of the American people, but she has carved out a few moments with us tonight to talk a bit more. And Congresswoman, I'd love to welcome you onto the screen and welcome you to this panel. And thank you for your time this evening. So the Zoom floor is yours.
Well, Ms. Foster, thank you so very much for being the moderator of moderators and particularly for this very important event. Let me thank the Black Women's Health Imperative for the consistent work that you've done, making such an outstanding mark on the idea of Black women and health. I may take a different quick perspective on all that we're doing as relates to the question of Black women's health, as relates to obesity as well. Whenever you see a member of Congress, they're always moving papers around because we're always on the floor wanting to make sure that we're accurate when we speak. But today I'm going to mix not really apples and oranges, but try to work with this question of obesity and the work that we all need to do. I have to particularly acknowledge one of my hometown favorites, and that is Dr. Carla Vitale, and thank her for being there, and my other fellow Houstonian as well, and all of the panelists. So as a member of Congress, I serve on the House Budget Committee, House Judiciary Committee, and Homeland Security. I chair the Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security Committee, but in the Budget Committee, it is the world. In fact, we are the committee that will be crafting the final work of the Build Back Better Act of 2021. That bill in particular, I think, will be relevant to those of you tonight, and just want to recount for you some of the elements that women who are changing their lives both spiritually and physically, these are the kinds of support systems that we'll be putting in law. Paid family and medical leave, The Affordable Care Act expansion so that people who income does not allow them to get health insurance, we're going to give it to you. Expanding Medicare for dental, vision, hearing benefits, lowering eligibility age. And I might venture to say, being more flexible as it relates to obesity, addressing healthcare provider shortages, working on long-term care for seniors and persons with disabilities, and health equity, maternal behavior, racial justice, health investments. That one in particular focuses on the discriminatory impact or how obesity is treated. I am also a co-sponsor of HR 1577, Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, a bill that expands Medicare coverage of intensive behavioral therapy for obesity. Specifically, the bill allows coverage for therapy that is provided by a physician who is not a primary care physician, other health providers, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and approved counseling programs if provided upon referral. But the intersection of obesity, health, and faith can be seen but not easily understood. The intersection is where the center of our lives is. Faith and family are two of the most important things of Black women. Our faith governs our lives in small and big ways. It's not just when we worship, what day we worship, what time we worship, but we try to live our faith and we try to be faithful to the one we believe in, the one in whatever faith we happen to be. It took many years for the physical appearance of women wearing makeup or other cosmetic changes to be accepted in some places of worship because of concerns that it was more for vanity instead of it being seen as a statement about the person and not a judgment about what they believe. Black women's beliefs can carry over into their everyday lives, whether it is our views on spiritualities, definition of family, perception of beauty, or what is good for our health. That means the question of the ideal body shape. Earlier today, I was on a discussion that mentioned the Crown Act. The Crown Act deals with legislation throughout the nation, dealing with how we women wear our hair. Black women in particular have been the target. Black girls, Black young men, but in particular, Black girls have been the target in various school districts about how you wear your hair, what kind of braids you have, and how it looks. Do you have dreads? Do you have curly hair? And at the same time, children who are obese, young Black girls, face the same kind of challenges. Black women's belief can carry over, as I said, into their everyday lives, and Black women's perceptions regarding an ideal body shape, such as being shapely and curvy, having large breasts, hips, and back size, are perceived to be more attractive in the Black community, maybe, than other communities. Although faith-based weight loss interventions have been effective in promoting weight loss among Blacks, little is known about how body image and religious views contribute to weight-related beliefs among religious Black women. The important issues for Black women are our perception of attractiveness, what has been pushed as definition of beauty that stress features that are not African. Generations of women of African descent have been made to feel inadequate or for lacking straight hair, light skin, thin waist, all physical attributes defined as beautiful in our broader society dominated by one group of people. My point is that no matter how we look, we are beautiful. Whatever our hair looks like, whatever our color skin is, our coloration is, we're beautiful. But all of this, as we are talking about tonight, has to take a back seat to the question of health. And the question of how we address that question and also bring out the beauty of women is so very important. Further complicating the discussion on weight for African American women is body shape, which despite weight can make certain cuts of clothing impossible. Compounding all of the discussion of weight is unaddressed issue of shoe sizes, smaller sizes, more bountiful than larger sizes. I am a short person with a large foot, so I really understand it, what happens in our different shapes and sizes. The lived experience for African American girls and women for generations has involved the use of skin lightening creams, makeup to reduce the fullness of lips, girdles, and shades of powders and eyeshadows that were too light for darker skin. We should really focus tonight, as you are, on the question of whether or not we use whatever makeup, however we look. We should not overlook the contributors to weight gain that involve stress, sleep apnea, prediabetes, and other health conditions that, if left untreated, often lead to weight gain. I have a wonderful potpourri of constituents in the 18th Congressional District. In fact, we are the mother district of voting rights, having been created under the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But that means I have a richly diverse community, heavily sprinkled with beautiful Black people, many of whom are overweight. many of whom are experiencers of diabetes. One symptom of prediabetes that is particularly challenging is feelings of hunger caused by dysfunction in the glucose monitoring that the body uses to regulate calorie intake. Instead of feeling full after a meal due to insulin resistance, the person feels hungry, will attempt to eat until the feeling of hunger is saturated. I've seen the impact of diabetes in my community. Overweight women who work very, very hard, overweight men. These women have to focus on their jobs, getting their children back and forth to school, many instances being the single breadwinner. So when we talk about obesity, we have to talk about the holistic aspect of a woman. I can, as a legislator, offer the legislation that will provide additional opportunities for therapy involving the woman's spiritual life as it relates to counseling under this federal law. But we have to get involved. 84 million other Americans have prediabetes, also known as borderline diabetes. Only 1 in 9 of them are aware of it. The other 8 and 9 are likely to develop type 2 diabetes. And so we see that certainly as a form of overweight. We see as well in women, Black women in particular, that an overweight person, not necessarily, can also have a problem of maternal mortality. And Black women particularly have a challenge of infant mortality, the infant death, but also as the question of Black women dying in birth, maternal mortality. That's a tragic circumstance. And so in 2019, I introduced an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which was adopted to address the issue of maternal mortality. The real question that I think I'm tying this to is the fact that obesity can generate many types of illness and shorten persons' lives. I want to focus just for a moment as I close on the questions of African American women and obesity. They have the highest rates of obesity or being overweight compared to other groups in the United States. About 4 out of 5 African American women are overweight or obese. Let me say this intersectionality has several aspects to it. We call ourselves full-bodied women. We use that, and it is certainly something that we should not run away with. In fact, a full-bodied woman can be healthy, but it is important for us to note the difference between full-bodied women or woman that measures up to your size in terms of your height, in terms of your bone density, as opposed to obesity. Obesity in the African American community has been a growing concern in recent decades and can be attributed to a multitude of societal elements. Let me also say that it is well known that depression, the inability to accomplish things, overstressed in how do you provide for your family, not being able to take time for yourself, not getting that morning walk or evening walk. The only thing that you're doing is working and trying to make ends meet. Contributing factors in obesity include, but are not limited to, inequities in stable and affordable housing, risks of living in food deserts, income, access to quality education. Each one of these factors has the potential to directly or indirectly influence an individual's chance to live a longer and healthier life. In addition, if one combines those circumstances with disparities in access to affordable and healthy food or safe places to be physically active, the picture of obesity in the African American community begins to take shape. Among African American adults, nearly 48% are clinically obese, including 37% of men, 56.6% of women, compared to that of whites, 32%. So as I conclude my remarks, let me close by saying, in addition to obesity, generally speaking, the Centers for Disease Control have found a connection between obesity and COVID-19 as well. There are a lot of elements to this. That's why this meeting tonight could not be more important. This Reclaim Your Wellness, the intersection of obesity, health, and faith, and the Black Women's Health Initiative is extremely important to the work that we all should be doing. Allow me to salute you and salute your leaders and thank you for the invitation. Let me acknowledge my former Deputy Director, Shashrina Thomas, who's been instrumental in making sure I did this tonight. Linda Gola Blunt, President and CEO of the Black Women's Initiative. Forgive me, there's a person in our state called Linda Gale, so forgive me. Linda Gola Blunt, let me thank you as well. Maya Angelou told us, beyond that we were phenomenal women, she said, show me who you are, and that is who we are. We cannot accept that Black women are outside of the circle of beauty, nor can we accept, as they show themselves, that their obesity or their size cannot be made healthy, that we cannot focus on a healthy pathway through their faith, through their friendship, through health, that they can turn their lives around. I consider obesity as another element of civil rights. We should no less think about healthcare and the idea of making sure communities are healthy as we should think about voting rights. And as well, many of you know that I've been the lead sponsor and a strong advocate for HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations, the Commission to Study Slavery and Develop Reparation Proposals. I've been on an educational campaign to let people understand this is probably one of the most singular initiatives and laws that we could ever pass, to develop this commission to study the long trajectory of slavery, the foods we ate, and where we are today. I encourage you, as you do this health initiative, this wellness, that you advocate for HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals, because it embraces the very concepts of what we're discussing today, which is, who are we as a people? Why is our health this way? Who are we as women? How can we focus more on wellness? What is that trajectory that has brought us from slavery? What is the stress and pressure, the economic conditions that gives us our burden today? So it is a holistic approach. I'm delighted that faith is included in it. And I have been using throughout the day, yes, I've been doing Zooms today, and I've been using something today that I'm going to leave with you. My dear friend, John Lewis, in the waning days and years, months of his life, wrote a book called Carry On. And I've been using it as a show and tell. Having 6-year-old grandchildren, show and tell is a lot of fun. But I will say it tonight, and what you will do as you proceed, and that is that we have to carry on. He speaks about courage, he speaks about character, but I have taken it just as these words, carry on. And until we complete this holistic approach to health, we need to carry on. Thank you so very much for having me, and I wish you the very best as you continue in this session tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, always helping us carry on and setting the table for the conversation that is to come. And I'd like to introduce to our audience the two doctors who will be participating for the first part of our panel, Dr. Michael Knight, who specializes in internal medicine and obesity medicine with the GW Medical Faculty Associates here in Washington, D.C., and also Dr. Carla Vitale, who is president and CEO of the Vitale Health and Wellness Center. She specializes in internal medicine, obesity medicine, and nephrology from Houston, Texas, the district that Congresswoman Jackson Lee represents. And we know, before we get started, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, that you are quite busy, but we would love for you to stay if you can. So stay for what you need, leave when you have to go, and we appreciate your presence, and we're going to carry on with this conversation. So if we could start, I think it's always good to start and lay the foundation, because Congresswoman Jackson Lee told us a lot about what we are actually going to talk about tonight. But Dr. Knight, why don't we start with the clinical definition of obesity? Because as the Congresswoman referenced, there are some Black women who may not realize what the definition of obesity actually is. We may see ourselves differently than we may actually present. So let's talk about the actual definition, the clinical definition of obesity.
Thank you, Leslie. And I think that's so important. You know, you defined obesity actually quite well at the beginning of the program. It is a multifactorial, complex neurobehavioral disease, chronic disease, that leads to alterations in our metabolic health, as well as our psychosocial health and our physical health. The reality is that oftentimes people hear BMI, and that can be a very triggering word for many individuals, because all we see is a number on the scale. But when we look at the BMI officially, at a BMI of 30 or higher, and again, we calculate the BMI looking at your weight and your height, a BMI of 30 or higher is defined as obesity. Does that mean that everyone has to have a BMI of 24? Absolutely not. However, that is just the entry point to a conversation around how excess weight may be affecting your health and how there may be opportunities for improvement.
let's talk about, and I want to keep you here for just one more second, Dr. Knight, because we always get a lot of pushback when we have these conversations about calling obesity a chronic disease. Why do you think we get so much pushback about that? Does that speak to the need to continue to educate people about what obesity is and what it is not?
We definitely have to educate, because for many individuals, as well as healthcare professionals, when they think about obesity, we think it's a willpower issue. We think it's a you have not pushed away from the table enough, right? You want to eat less and exercise more, you wouldn't have this problem. And I think that the data that we have seen in the last decades has really explained that this is just not a number on the scale. It is a neurobehavioral condition where physiologic forces actually have a great impact on the weight that we have. So I don't look in the mirror every morning and think, oh, I don't have excess weight just because I know exactly what I'm doing. I would have to be as precise as a half potato chip per day to maintain my intake and energy expenditure to prevent weight gain. So we know that individuals that are dealing with obesity actually have a physiologic and pathophysiologic complex condition that has allowed them to get to that point. And that is why it's so important we have these conversations so we can validate how people feel. It's not just about willpower. It's actually a condition, just like we treat the rest of your health, that requires complex and targeted care.
Dr. Vitale, I'd like to bring you in now, because as someone who focuses on disease prevention and healthy lifestyles, let's talk about stigma. Stigma can really be paralyzing. How does the stigma of being overweight, the stigma of obesity, and the stigma of language used around obesity impact healthy outcomes?
Definitely, that's an excellent question, because healthcare, actually, the weight bias and how that affects individuals, these negative stereotypes, definitely cuts deep. And we see that on a daily basis. It can lead to low self-esteem. It can lead to depression. It can often lead to anxiety. And we do know that our patients are struggling with these issues, and it is a chronic condition. But even in healthcare, we can see that bias, or the weight bias, affects people in the workplace, in the healthcare setting, and pretty much all different settings. So it is very important to be cognizant of that and to provide a safe space where we can really address that, and individuals can address their own biases as well. But it definitely affects outcomes, and it affects people's perceptions of themselves. So we always want to make sure that we're addressing that, and we are very cognizant of how people are treated. But people are often perceived as being lazy, or just other things, just based on their weight. And that's a very visual thing that they're met with from the moment they walk into different arenas. So
there is weight bias that you talk about, and there is, during a pandemic, the difference between life and death, because what we've learned about living with obesity is that people who are on that journey, people who are living with obesity, are disproportionately being impacted by COVID and having the worst outcomes possible. So can you tell us a little bit about why that's happening? What is it about obesity that impacts people with COVID-19 and puts them at risk for other infectious diseases?
Yes, that's also another good point. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we were a little bit more or less certain as to the role of obesity in COVID-19. And we've seen so much more severe illness due to underlying obesity. And of the hospitalizations, about 70% of the patients are obese. And when we look at how obesity plays a role, it's linked to decreases in immune function. It does make it more difficult for patients to be ventilated. It also decreases lung capacity. So there are a variety of reasons why people with obesity are more affected, but it really is in the top three risk factors for severe illness due to COVID. And we've learned this over the past year and a half when we look at outcomes, higher rates in the ICU, intensive care, the sickest patients. And a lot of that has to do with its role on the immune system, worsening inflammation, difficulty with ventilation. So it really is a long list of how it really is ravaging patients who have that underlying condition. So very serious.
So we have a better understanding now of how serious it is to live with obesity. But Dr. Knight, let's talk about some of the innovations taking place in addressing it. How effective are some of these anti-obesity medications? And I know people ask about them quite a bit, so let's talk about it.
They can be extremely effective, Leslie, and the challenge is that so many people don't know about them, and so many people don't have access to them. I mean, the fact is, in the United States, less than 2% of individuals with obesity are offered pharmacotherapy, medications, or surgery for interventions. So when we think about anti-obesity medications, we have medications that are available, FDA approved, safe and effective, that can allow patients to achieve much higher levels of weight loss. There's no magic pill. A lot of people say, I don't want a medication, I want to do it on my own. The medications work to help you in your process. So you still have to make those dietary changes. You still have to have that physical activity, but there are multiple classes of medications that can help to control appetite, as well as address some of the metabolic changes that happen in the body when we develop excess weight and lead to 10, 15, 20 or more percent total body weight loss. And I'll tell you, I have seen patients who have had such great outcomes and overcome years of challenges with regard to obesity as a result of these technology and this medication and these treatment options that have now available to patients.
Dr. Vitale, can you talk with us about some of the successful intervention methods that you've been able to use?
Definitely. And one of the rewarding things about this field, after practicing obesity medicine for almost the last decade and being a practicing nephrologist for the past 16 years, is that really a lot of our health conditions and our underlying conditions are really connected. When we think about nutrition and the role nutrition plays in chronic disease, if we put that as one of the pillars that we're going to focus on nutrition for all chronic disease, the role of physical activity and engaging people in activities that they come to enjoy so we can have consistency. That's extremely important in success, long-term success. And it makes the changes, the lifestyle changes that are necessary, a lot easier as we put things together in the toolbox. So medication is definitely a role, and it plays an important role, but along with diet, along with physical activity, along with those lifestyle modifications. But the consistency and that long-term commitment and having a team-based approach is really crucial. So I'm glad that we have a panel where we're looking at all the different aspects of what happens in the health community and what happens outside of our office settings, because we really need a team-based approach, which involves our community leaders, faith-based leaders, and places where, our patients are going to touch on a daily basis to help keep it going.
We're going to bring our faith-based leaders and organizations in just a moment, but I got to ask you, Dr. Knight, about TROA, right? So we heard Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee talking about this legislation that is hopefully going to help address this issue of disparities with respect to treatment of obesity. How do you feel in the real world that this would help your patients?
It would be trailblazing. It would be amazing for this legislation to pass and allow patients to have access to effective therapies. I want to give you an example here. Imagine if we were a year into 20 years into the COVID-19 pandemic and we had a vaccine available, we had treatments available, and your insurance would not pay for it. You had no access to it. This is what we're dealing with obesity. We have 65 million people around the world dealing with obesity. And in the United States, over 42% of individuals are dealing with obesity. And we know that today, most people don't have access to medications, to behavioral therapy, even to see a dietitian, and for it to be covered by insurance. So the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, or TROA, is specifically looking at Medicare, which blocks coverage for anti-obesity medications and oftentimes behavioral therapy, as well as coverage to see dietitians and other members of the healthcare team specifically for obesity without having to tag on additional diagnoses.
Doctors, I want you to stay with us, and that's been really good information. And I also want to let our people know who have joined us for this special hour that if you have questions, and we know you do, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we're going to get them read and shared with all of our panel of experts tonight as we get closer to the end of our time together. I'm going to introduce now the rest of our esteemed panel, and I know Dr. Knight and Dr. Vitale, you'll be here as well, and we'll weave you into the discussion. But I'd like to bring in Dr. Boise Kimber, who is the senior pastor for First Calvary Baptist Church in New Haven, Connecticut. He's on the board of directors of the National Baptist Convention. Thank you for joining us. Stuart Nelson is the vice president of the Institute of Spirituality and Health with the Texas Medical Center. Thank you for joining us, Stuart. Then we've got Marguerite Butler, who is a faith and diabetes trainer at Brown Chapel AME Church in Houston, Texas. And we round out this dynamic group with Michelle Tedder. She's called Coach Tedder to some, and she is a community health consultant, a nurse, and an obesity awareness specialist. Thank you all for being here tonight and making some time to share some of your pearls of wisdom with all the people who have gathered with us tonight. Dr. Kimber, I got to ask you, so this Turn Obesity Around initiative is something that started within the National Baptist Convention. How did that come about?
Thank you, Leslie. It came about with Kimberly Williams at Nova Nordisk reaching out to us, and we reached out to our president, Dr. Jerry Young, who thought it was a great idea for us to get involved with obesity. And so the National Baptist Convention now is seeking to launch a national educational awareness campaign. And we're calling it TOA, Turn Obesity Around. And so that's how we got involved in it through our health department of the National Baptist Convention that is called HOPE. And so we are excited about working with the organization and Kimberly Williams to spread this gospel throughout our National Baptist Convention.
You know, it's interesting that this is evolving in a faith-based way and coming through the church, because in a lot of ways people may seek counsel from you, Pastor, and the church has often nourished the spirit. But when we think about sometimes the foods that we may get in the church setting, they tend to sometimes be the foods that may be highly inflammatory, or they may be higher in fat. How is the church, and how are you reaching your members in your community and helping to change the way they may view certain things?
Well, the average pastor in our convention or any other convention has more access to people of color in the community and have some influence on those individuals. And so the National Baptist Convention believe in the holistic approach and the holistic ministry, which addresses the mind, the body, and spirit. And so we are actually, talking about how we stop having these fish fry dinners at our church and these chicken dinners and learning to eat healthy. And I think COVID-19 has helped us a great deal to look at how we are eating as persons. And so we're going to continue to speak and ask our parishioners, listen, let's live a healthy life. Let's take obesity, as my big mama would say in Alabama, by the tail, and let's swing it around.
I like that. Let's swing it around. I want to bring in Marguerite Butler, who is a faith and diabetes trainer with Brown Chapel AME in Houston. And Marguerite, before we dig in really deep, I'd love for you to share your story about your own journey with us.
Well, let me just say that I'm so grateful for Congressman talking about faith, about diabetes, and about health initiatives for Black women. Um, I didn't expect for her to have that kind of knowledge and that kind of depth in her remarks, but she certainly touched on a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about. One of the things that happened with me and I guess started me down this road of obesity had everything to do with my mother passing when I was 14 years old. She died from cancer. But before that happened, but while she was sick, I started having problems at school, bullying problems at school. And one of the things that the congressperson talked about was this issue of skin color, this issue of weight gain, and how children, she didn't talk about children, but how it starts in our youth. And that's where it started for me as I was thinking about this question. That's where I could roll the ball back to my grade school career. And then when I talk about my mom, my mother got sick and died the year just before my sophomore year in high school. But she had started being concerned about my weight, about me gaining weight. But that was something, the kinds of things that were going on at school, I never discussed with her. And I didn't discuss them, not because I knew she was sick, but I knew something was wrong, because in those days, she died in 1967. In those days, parents didn't talk to their children about anything that was as serious as her having cancer. And I can roll my life forward very quickly and talk about when I turned around 40, I was told I was pre-diabetic, and I clearly didn't know what that meant, and it was never explained to me what it meant, and so I absolutely ignored it. I did not pay attention to it. I went on about my business until another doctor asked me, "Well, do you want to stick yourself with a needle?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And he said, "Well, you're going to have to because you're diabetic." So that was my entry into taking insulin shots. And I then became extremely concerned about my health, but I had no idea what to do about it. I did go to dietitians, but they were similar to robots. You go in, they tell you the same thing. And there was never any concern about what was going on with the person or with me. And so I never had any inkling that diabetes could lead to my death. And it was when my father passed that I knew diabetes could lead to your death, but it never occurred to me that it would happen to me. And
so Marguerite, I'm going to move your story forward a little bit, because I know that you have had this journey you've been on this journey with obesity. You made changes in your own life, and you've become a coach, really a mentor for people in your own faith-based organization around this, helping them to turn their own lives around and changing the trajectory of their lives. I wonder what role faith has played in the journey for all of you, and has it made this journey a little easier?
Well, it's made the journey a lot easier. I don't know that I would have made the journey. I don't know that I'd still be living if it had not been for my faith and for my exposure to the church, because it gives you hope. Even if you don't see the hope, even if you don't know where the hope is coming from, you believe in Christ, and you believe that Christ will give you the victory. You don't know how, you don't know where, and you don't know when, but you do believe that God will give you the victory. And so it is because of that I believe that the city's changing diabetes came into my life to help me with moving out of the grasp of diabetes, because when I had my bariatric surgery, it immediately diabetes, but it did not take away the obesity. It did give me an opportunity to lose a great amount of weight, but it hasn't permitted me to lose all of the weight that I need to lose. And that's because it's more to diabetes, and it's more to losing weight than just saying you're going to lose it. And it's really an emotional, and it's a mental, and it's more than what meets the eye. And as a result, I'm still working through the weight loss, even though I've at this point lost about 75 pounds.
That is terrific. That is terrific. Stuart, I want to bring you into the conversation now, because your organization, the Institute for Spirituality and Health, has been around for quite some time. Talk about this whole idea about spirituality and health that has really been your mission for decades.
Certainly. Thanks for the opportunity. Early in our founding in 1955, the visionaries who founded the Institute for Spirituality and Health and the Medical Center, they knew that medicine needs to truly be effective to care for the whole person. And caring for the body or caring for a disease is only one part of a huge equation of wholeness that really has been touched upon multiple times this evening already. In order to make those strides forward, we need to pay attention to mental health care, physical health care on a number of layers, pharmacologically, behaviorally, but also spiritual health. And so wrapping all of that together is really what ISH has been advancing for the last 66 years. Really, our mission is to enhance well-being by exploring this deep relationship between spirituality and health. And we do that in a number of ways, and have for several decades, like you said.
Can you talk a little bit about the programs that specifically address obesity within the Institute?
Certainly. So several years ago, we were approached by Cities Changing Diabetes to be a part of the Faith in Diabetes initiative, which now we've led in Houston and Philadelphia, and helped consult in some other cities. And really the vision behind Faith in Diabetes is that we can creatively leverage the power of tradition, the power of faith, the power of the human spirit towards healthcare and towards behavioral change and towards lifestyle change. So when we work with faith communities, we start with faith and we ask, what texts are the most important to your faith community? What parts of history are the most important to your community? What foods are the most important? What times and seasons and traditions are the most important? And how can we creatively channel all of that specialness towards care for diabetes or care for obesity or care for a range of other chronic diseases and conditions? And the creative power of the communities we work with is it's so inspirational, it's so deep, and it's all driven by a strong commitment to the traditions that they're part of. You know, it's amazing to see people make connections between their favorite scripture and what they're trying to accomplish weight loss wise, or their communities that they're part of, sources of support, their circles of friends, the inspiration of their pastor, and what they're trying to do health wise. So helping people bridge those worlds that sometimes are siloed, helping people bridge those worlds it's a joy to be a part of.
Michelle Tedder, you found a way to bridge that gap a while ago, and I'd love to know a little bit about your own personal weight loss journey and how your faith sustained you as well.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. And first, it's a pleasure to be on this panel and to talk about this very important subject. And yes, faith is the foundation of everything, I think. And as someone mentioned, that this is a mind, body, spirit issue. And when I talk about this, I always tell people that you cannot address one without the other. And so for me, I struggled my entire life. And I literally I just need an answer to this issue because I was doing all the things, all the things, the exercise and the dieting and the this and the that. And I was fortunate to have a primary care physician who understood obesity medicine and who actually had to convince me that this was beyond me. And she was pointing out to me that, Michelle, you're changing your diet, you're doing all the things, this is bigger than you. And so she was the person who helped me, even as a well-trained professional. I was, in community education work, I was doing all these things, and I still shame and the guilt and all of those things. Can I do this on my own? And she sat one day and said, Michelle, I really, really want you to consider talking to a surgeon about weight surgery. I trusted my physician, and so she was the person who really opened my eyes to this, and it was my faith that really enabled me to be able to consider this to possibly be a tool. And I can tell you, it was the best decision that I've ever made in my life. And so in 2017, I had the sleeve and have lost about 90 pounds and kept it off. And I went on to, my faith is such a big deal with this. I went on to create an online community called Bariatric Blessed, because I was the tool and the grace that has allowed me to be able to do the things that I could not do on my own. And I think that's what I want people to understand, is that being able to have access to the weight loss medications, have access to surgery, that does not indicate that you're a failure. It's more tools in your toolbox to be able to address this very complex issue. And so that's what I believe that these forums can do for people, is to educate people and let them know that it's not about calories in and calories out. So much bigger than that. I was doing that. It's not about how edgy you are. It's not about, it's more than that. And real narrative. So one of my soapboxes that I'm very passionate about is changing the narrative around the diet industry, telling us, well, if you try this diet and that diet, trust me, I tried them all. They don't work. And so it's really about having a very comprehensive, medically scientific driven approach to dealing with this issue. So, and faith is at the center of it. For me, that's the foundation. It's kind of like building a house. If you don't have, it's probably not going to stand. So it is mind, body, and spirit. And so all those things are in my toolbox.
You all have shared so much wisdom and so many important things as we navigate this conversation about how faith intersects with helping people who are living with obesity. And so much so that we've gotten to the point now where I'm hoping we can get some questions in from the very people who have been spending time with us. So now is your time to really send in those questions, and we want to get your questions answered tonight. We know that it's rare that you have this kind of group come together on an evening to be able to impart the knowledge that they have. So if you've got questions now, it's a great time to go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll get to them as soon as we can. And while that's occurring, I'll ask another question. Dr. Kember, what have some of the outcomes been from Turn Obesity Around? Tell us about how it is succeeding in changing lives.
Well, one of the things that we have done, we have had several workshops, and we, from the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, and the Midwest region, they have hosted the Turn Obesity webinars and to turn it around. And so we've been actively involved and engaged. We have reached probably about 1,500 churches so far that is on board with us as we continue to talk to our churches across the country. We have 5 regions here in the U.S., and then we have the Virgin Islands, we have Bahamas, we have Africa. And so we have taken this task on very seriously to help our community. And I'm delighted tonight to be a part of this panel and to hear our women talk about what they have done. And I'm hoping that this will inspire Black men even to more to work on our obesity, and that we can get our weight and our eating habits under control.
You know, I wonder how faith keeps you going. Now, I know how faith keeps me going, and I'm sure you all know how faith keeps you going in your own respective ways. But for people who may not be leaning on their faith at this point to navigate this journey, and this is really to any of you who want to take the question, how does introducing faith into the process help you stay the course, stay inspired, keep going on the tough days, the days where you don't want to do it? How does faith keep you going?
That's a wonderful question. So I'll jump in and take that. I really think that the consistency is key when we think about weight loss. And it really is not a one size fits all with the medical management versus the surgical management. So at times you'll hear someone say, well, my friend had this and it worked for them and it doesn't work for me. And they're frustrated. But everyone's goal and everyone's path is going to be slightly different. So we encourage you to seek help. And when we call on a higher power, oftentimes people call upon their faith to keep going. Every day won't be easy. Every day you won't feel like getting up and participating in more activity or burning more calories or doing that or changing something. Change is hard. So it really does take something inside of you, and often external motivators as well, to pull upon that and draw upon that when the times are a little bit more difficult. So the path to weight loss is induction as well as maintenance. And we've heard the story of people who lose a lot of weight, but our goal is actually to keep it off so we can actually reduce chronic disease. And when we think about it as a lifelong struggle, we want to include obesity just as we include hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, chronic conditions. So we just want to be aware that this is going to take some time. It may be frustrating, but calling upon that inward tenacity and oftentimes your spirituality can definitely help that process.
I think that what we believe in from a religious standpoint, and when we talk about faith, and we say, and we believe that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so when we have dived into this turn obesity around, we're having the faith and that this can happen because it is the substance of what we're trying to do. And there are sometimes the evidence cannot be seen openly, but the evidence can be felt inward.
Michelle?
Yeah, I think that, so there's three components to successfully navigate. There's meals, there's mindset, size, how you think about this. I think that when you start talking about mindset, that's the foundation of the spirituality part, at least for me it is. And so every day I'm very intentional about what I do. So I get up in the mornings, I have a devotional that I do that sets the tone for the day. And so once that's the tone rooted in that, then that's motivation for the exercise, for how you make your choices around what you're going to eat, what you're not going to eat, and I think that if you get that kind of 360 around how you do, because that's really what it comes down to. If you're in this for the long haul, that's what you have to be, because surgery is not going to cure this. It's just, like I said, it's the grace to help you to do what you couldn't do on your own. But if you can take that multidimensional approach, it's that the mindset and the spirituality being the center of that will ground you and help to keep you centered for the long haul. Because it's a journey, right? It's, I'm going to do this for a couple of months and I'm done with it. It literally is a journey. So you have to keep doing it. It's a little bit every day, and it's the consistency and it's a steady action plan.
I would say that there's no failure in God. And since there's no failure in God, even if I fail, I know that tomorrow or the next moment that God will help me to go the next mile of the way or the next moment of the way. So it is my ultimate belief that God will help to direct my path and to take me to where I need to go and where God wants me to go. That where faith comes in for me.
Stuart?
When I think about the relationship between faith and health, I think of it as a two-way street. So a lot of what we've discussed this evening is how faith can be used to embolden us, to empower us, to lean on, to be an anchor or a rock in times of uncertainty or difficulty. It's a wellspring that we can drink from when we need inspiration and community. So that those are all ways in which faith impacts health. But there's another way to the street too, and that's kind of turning things on the head, which is how health impacts faith. And I think that's a really important part of this discussion, where as we deal with obesity, as we deal with diabetes and heart disease, that journey, that physical journey, it reflects back on the way that we answer the big questions and the ways we're in relationship with our higher powers and our faith communities. So I've heard narratives, from participants where becoming healthier in body and mind improves their relationship with their faith community, improves their relationship with God, the divine. And so it's this dance between faith and health. That's a two-way street. And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts about it. It's a dialogue between faith and health. It's ongoing and churning through all of life.
We've got a question here that's coming in, and the question is, how can the church best help change the cultural narrative around obesity? Changing the cultural narrative around obesity. Dr. Kinder?
By talking about it, by having seminars, webinars, and the church has a responsibility to help its constituency to become more healthy. And so it has to become a part of our sermons, how we speak. Churches should have a health department within their church. We do. And they speak every Sunday. Every Sunday we have our Dr. Nelson to speak on a different subject every Sunday. And she talks about obesity to me all the time, because I need to do better about my eating and exercising myself. So the church has a responsibility. And so the Black church has to do more than sing, more than preach, but has an obligation to help its constituency to live healthy lives and long lives.
Dr. Knight, I want to ask you this question here, and you see all kinds of people who come into your office in all parts of their journey. We're getting questions about group exercise, support groups. And I wonder for you, is there a connection between faith and a broader community and how successful someone may be on this journey, regardless of what you decide their continuum of care is going to be when they come to your office? Is the faith, is it the community, is it having people who have your back? Does that ultimately help you on this journey?
Definitely, Leslie. And, as someone who's a person of faith myself, I think it's having a faith community. I mean, think about community. Think about when we were going through the COVID-19 pandemic and in quarantine and lockdown, and how that void of interaction with other people, not being able to go to church, not being able to be around individuals that build you up. the loneliness that comes out of it. And what oftentimes I see with my patients who are dealing with obesity, they feel like they're in it alone. They feel like when they fall down, they are by themselves, that everyone else is succeeding and they are struggling. And so it's a great opportunity to be able to not only have a community where we're sharing our faith, where we're praising together, where we're praying together, but we're building together. You know, when we talk about our bodies as the temple, think about how transformational that can be. And I agree with the pastor on the program tonight. We should be having health ministries that are very, very strong in our church. When we think about companies that invest in health programs for their employees, is because they want the employees to operate at their highest potential. Our churches should want our members to be able to come every weekend, every Sunday, every Saturday, and be ready to be engaged, to go out into the community. We can't do that if we don't have our health. And so this is a great opportunity to let our faith communities put health at the forefront so that we can continue to be that temple and that vessel to be able to impact the life of someone else.
We've got time for probably one last question, and I'm kind of combining a few. There are some people who have gathered who say they've been trying to lose this weight, and now that they're getting older, they feel like it's harder to drop the pounds. And so what else can we do? What other groups should be at the table when we're having these conversations? And I'll give that to any number of you to take us out of here. Dr. Vitale, you want to start?
Absolutely. And that is absolutely true, that the metabolism does slow down with each decade. So we hear that postmenopausal women, and that's the majority of my practice, but I'm also glad to take care of men and, you know, adolescents as well. But each decade we are having that slowing of the metabolism, and we really have to be aggressive. So I agree with involving all the groups. So this is the time where we have all hands on deck. Our spiritual faith leaders that are having webinars, and we're introducing more options for healthy foods at every touch point. So whether that's church on Sundays, and the pandemic has really had that isolation effect where the movement has slowed down. More people were sedentary. They were working from home. They were doing a lot on the screen. So more screen time and more sedentary lifestyle. So if we can find every touch point to increase our non-exercise, just activity. So whether it's walking more, going to the grocery stores, parking further, taking the stairs, and introducing that component into the day, that's helpful. If we're increasing our muscle mass so we can burn more at rest by adding strength training, that's when those group fitness classes definitely would be helpful to have that sense of community when you try a new activity. So whether that's taking a new class you haven't tried before, dancing for fun, we definitely want to enhance community effort, and then providing those healthy food choices, especially in areas where it's not as widespread, and making it more affordable. So that's another thing. How can we make things faster, but also more affordable? So we're trying to approach it from so many different aspects. So it definitely helps to have all hands on deck.
And you know what? I think that's going to have to be the last word, because we are coming up at the end of our program. And I just want to thank all of you for your contributions tonight, for fueling our faith, for keeping us going, and for encouraging us wherever you are in this journey, that you can do it, and that your faith is something that should be part of this process as well. And so I just want to thank Dr. Knight, Dr. Vitale, Dr. Kember, Stuart Nelson, Marguerite Butler, and Michelle Tedder. Thank you all for making time tonight to share your wisdom with others. I hope you enjoyed this panel as much as I did. We always learn something from our time together, from our doctors, from our spiritual leaders, and most definitely from Marguerite and Michelle, who have walked the walk and are helping others along the path as well. On behalf of the Black Women's Health Imperative and Healthy Women, we would like to thank you for tuning in, and of course, Novo Nordisk for making this important conversation possible. Don't forget to check out the website, www.reclaimyourwellness.com. Have a great evening, and thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on our next great conversation.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thank you.